Well, today we're in week 5 in our series called Too Casual. We're looking at the characteristics of God and how sometimes as followers of Jesus, we can be too casual, too cavalier in how we approach God, and that can get us in trouble. And Pastor Russ, we're talking today about the justice of God, and this seems to have something to do with Batman for some reason. I don't understand that.
Yeah, because the figure of Batman really is a good clue that in our culture, really every culture, every human culture, we want justice. We know that, hey, bad guys should not get away with evil, and good guys should be recompensed, and people should not be exploited and oppressed. And so our culture has created the character of Batman as a kind of a cry for justice, as a way of saying, hey, justice needs to be done.
Right.
Right. So,
and this is why the story of the Bible is so compelling, especially for people maybe who don't know it. Because Ross, you say that Jesus himself exemplifies the justice of God. In what way? How?
Well, there's a lot of ways, but one story in particular shows this, because in his last week in Jerusalem before he was crucified, Jesus went into the temple, and maybe you're familiar with the story, how he went to the temple and he stopped them buying and selling stuff. He overturned the tables. He acted pretty aggressively. Well, what was going on there is that two things were evidence of injustice in that situation. Number one is they had taken the area that God had set apart for the Gentiles. The Gentiles could still approach God even though it was in the outer court. Well, they took that over and turned it into a mall. And so the Gentiles were not being treated, they were not being given their due that God had promised them. And then when worshipers came to Jerusalem from far away, they had to bring a sacrifice to the temple. Well, if you came from another country, you couldn't bring your animals with you, so you could buy animals there in the temple courts, but they were charging exorbitant rates. They were price gouging, kind of like buying food at the ballpark, you know. You have no choice, right? So you got to pay the price.
Exactly. God is angry about that.
God is angry about that, right? So, but this is worship, and God invited people to worship, and so the religious establishment was exploiting worshipers for their own gain, for their own power and money. Jesus went and said, hey, this isn't right. And so he said, stop it. He put an end to it.
Well, he did more than that, right? What was he doing? He flipped over tables and
he's chasing people out.
Yeah.
You know, and so he had this righteous indignation, righteous anger toward exploitation. That gives us a picture of the justice of God. He cares about what's right and wrong. He cares about people who are on the wrong end of injustice.
Yeah, and I think it's important to understand that the reason is because he cares about people.
Right.
Like you said, the Gentiles, the non-Jews. He cares about the Gentiles. He cares about Jews. He cares about people, and that's why justice matters to God. But then you say this, Pastor Russ, you say that God's justice is a comfort, but it's also a threat. What does that mean?
Right. Well, if you think about it, how much we long for justice, how much we long for Batman to show up, right? We long for justice. If you've ever been on the wrong side of an injustice, if somebody ran into your car and did damage to you or whatever, you're going like, that guy's got to pay. If you've ever been on the wrong side, you're going like, where's justice going to happen? What's it? So knowing that God is just and that God will set everything right someday, that's a comfort. But if you're the one who is causing injustice and you're profiting, then his justice is a threat, because you know that one day you're going to be accountable and stand before God to give an answer for what you've done.
So for people watching this today, Ross, who are trying to wrap their mind around the justice of God, you can again do that with your small group. Use those questions below. How does this impact us kind of on a practical level for the follower of Jesus today? As I open my eyes to that God cares about justice, what does that mean for me today?
Right, that's a great question. What it means is that God calls his people to act justly. As a just God, he calls us to act justly. And many Bible passages tell us that, and they explain what that means, that we don't rip somebody off, that we take an interest and a care for people who don't have any power in their own, in our society to see justice done for themselves. And you could talk about a lot of different things, how there's certain groups, if you're poorer in our legal system, you're not going to get as, acquitted as often as if you're rich. And depending on race and different things like that, your people are treated differently in our society. So it matters caring about those people who are defenseless. And the Bible mentions widows, orphans, the poor, the oppressed, strangers. And so who are those people in our society? Number one, how do I care about them? And then number two, how do I act justly in my sphere of life? You know, I'm not, I don't have the power of a judge to stand in a courtroom and say, you're guilty, you know. But in my life, in my relationships with other people, how do I act justly? And maybe it's just a matter of, I'm not going to take advantage of somebody. I'm going to treat everyone fairly, regardless of whether they're like me or not, or whether I'm comfortable around them or not. And so each one of us has to think through the applications of what it means to treat people fairly and to give them their due in our own relationships.